All people this morning and the session before talked about technology and about water technology. But I was thinking the whole time about if water technology is really essential for promoting cooperation and proper use of shared resources. I think water technologies and advanced water technologies alone is not enough to promote stability and promote peace and cooperation in any region, not only in the Middle East. There are other things which are required, which is political willingness from the politicians and to willingness to really work hand in hand and willingness really to share resources, to make proper use of resources. Seems, and I'm sure that Israel is leading in the water technologies in Israel, the region, and all over the world. But perhaps, let's say, water conservation reward should be given to Palestinians who are resisting living with 20 liters per capita per day. In many Palestinian areas south of Hebron, there are more than 200 people living with 20 liters per capita per day for domestic use. For agriculture, they have nothing. They rely on very little rainfall, below 150 millimeter per year. So is it because of lack of water resources? Not always. In this area, for example, the Eastern Aquifer recharge capacity is about 150 million cubic meter per year. Palestinians and Israelis, they are using half of this quantity. The other half remains in the aquifer, not used by anybody. So the question is it is not used because of this lack of technology, or the available technology is not capable of extracting it, or because of political will of keeping it not used by the Israelis and not used by the Palestinian? This is something which we have to ask ourselves about. Us, as Palestinian civil society, we work on the ground toward the enforcement of the capacities of our local authorities. We work to support our government in its water and environmental policies. And we work also hand in hand with other Israeli technological and research organizations. We have the pleasure in doing that and in benefiting from the experience of other nations, of other organizations in serving our population. We are not a research organization, we are not industry, we are not scientists, we are a group of engineers who are working to assist and do things on the ground. And I wanted briefly to present you this organization. We are found since 2002, and we are registered as a non-profit organization since 2004. And our interest and main field of work is environmental protection. We aim, as I said before, to assist our authorities in protection of the environment, assisting in planning, designing, fundraising of different environmental projects. From time to time, we do research activities. So far, we did research activities with the Arva Institute for Environmental Studies, thanks to small fund by an American organization, Osprey Foundation. But we are not dedicated completely to research. We work for the organizational performance improvement of the water and sanitation sector in Palestine. We work for the protection of water resources, Mainly, we work on wastewater treatment to protect the shared water resources from pollution. Our financial resources are coming mainly from donor community. We make proposals based on calls for proposals made by the EU, AFD, USAID, other donor countries. And very little resources comes from our own resources, but main resources are coming from international donor community. And we work for the municipalities, we work for the local authorities, we work for the poor municipalities who has not enough financial and technical resources and know-how on environmental and infrastructural projects. We are serving also in different activities the Palestinian National Water Authority, providing technical planning and advisory services. We work also for the Ministry of Local Government, trying to strengthen their capacities with regard and laws with regard to environment protection. We work on a low level, let's say, planning and implementing household wastewater treatment plants, separating gray wastewater from black wastewater, and then reusing the treated wastewater in agriculture, in greenhouses, using drip irrigation systems, the Nitafim drippers, which were presented before, or using under greenhouses, as you see in the picture, or at the open. I shall say that we have been the first organizations worldwide which used the, yes, thank you, which have used, which have reused the treated wastewater using drip irrigation systems in protected agriculture, in greenhouses. At the same time, we work also in conservation of the limited water resources, runoff water, protection of water coming from springs, collecting it in reservoirs, and using it. We assist at the same time also the municipalities in draining rainwater falls. So multidisciplinary interventions. We focus on food security. Agriculture and food is strongly connected to water. We promote the use of treated wastewater in agriculture, and we promote in rural areas the decentralized strategy where we can't construct, let's say, centralized wastewater treatment plants due to political and socio-economical existing situation. Then we build wastewater treatment plants for small communities and household by household. By the way, this approach, we have succeeded in promoting it also in other neighboring countries. In Lebanon, with a fund from the EU, we have succeeded in creating similar module in Mount Lebanon, in the Druze area in Lebanon, where we have succeeded also in enforcing a local law by the local authorities, local municipalities, in adopting treatment of wastewater at a household level. If you are not able to connect your house to a centralized wastewater scheme, then by law you should treat your wastewater at a household level. Unfortunately, so far we didn't succeed in having this enforced in Palestine, but we have succeeded in Lebanon. And we hope that one day we will be succeeding in doing it in our own homeland. We are using international technologies, and as I said before, Israeli technologies in constructing, in planning, designing, constructing major wastewater treatment plants. The one which you see up to the left-hand side is an RBC wastewater treatment plant for 5,000 people, which is going to be inaugurated on the 27th of this month at the presence of 4 Palestinian ministries. So we treat the wastewater, we collect it, we treat it, and we reuse it in agriculture. Beforehand, before doing this, we are obliged to go for fundraising, which is not easy, convincing major donors of the real need of these financial resources, because it's not little financial resources, it's a lot of financial resources. And we have to work hand in hand with the government and with the authority to be sure that we are working as per the strategic plans of the same government, the same Palestinian National Authority. So after that, we go for the planning, we go for the design, we go for the implementation, and we go for the startup. But we aim to have a comprehensive approach in collecting wastewater, and by this, we have an additional water resource, treating it, reusing it in agriculture. And it's a comprehensive approach which requires know-how about different environmental disciplinaries. In doing so, we have, as I said, I like to stress it, again, no problem in using whatever technology. And we would rather prefer to use the Israeli technology because it's there in the country, cost less, it's eligible by all donors donating funds to the Palestinian government, and it would be much easy and affordable to operate it and to maintain it. What I would like to say is that the Palestinians are in need to have the water resource itself in order to be able to do these projects and cooperate, and then to operate it, to maintain it, to use all of this technology. But if you will not have enough water resources, then all of these technologies, all of these industries, all of these nice words will not be enough to promote our ideas and our thinking. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I'll start off by just saying a few words about my organization. You all know my name by now, so I don't do. So the Arava Institute for Environmental Studies is an NGO located in southern Israel on Kibbutz Keturah, near Eilat. And what the Arava Institute does is it brings together students from Israel, Palestine, Jordan, and around the world, including, of course, the United States, to our campus to study environmental problems that are regional in scope, and jointly, by studying together and living together for at least 3 months, to figure out a way in which they can begin to identify and promote regional solutions to these problems. Another major part of our institute is research, also focusing on regional transboundary issues. And we have 4 centers that are looking at the following issues: water, of course, and I serve as the director for the Center for Transboundary Water Management, but we also have the Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Conservation, Center for Sustainable Agriculture, and a Center for Long-Term Ecological Research. All of these 4 centers are very active, working on cross-border problems in a collegiate way with Palestinian and Jordanian colleagues, and of course also colleagues from around the world, including the United States. And just one quick acknowledgement: the Arava Institute was founded in 1996 by Dr. Alon Tal in the back, so thank you, Alon. Otherwise I probably wouldn't be here. What I'd like to talk about is some of the work that we're doing in cooperation with Palestinians, including PWEG, on the challenge that I think is probably, if we're thinking about where next with regards to water challenges in the region, I think the challenge is transboundary wastewater. We heard a lot about this morning about innovations, and if we think about water supply, which is still a challenge in many ways, but I kind of think we've solved that issue. With the onset of desalination, has been mentioned at length here, I think that the issue of water supply is more or less resolved. The challenge, I think, that is next on the horizon for us is really a shift from looking at water supply issues to water quality issues. And this brings us to wastewater. Again, the technologies are there, the innovation is there, the capacity is there, but what we're facing is, because water does not recognize political borders, of course, and because the West Bank is topographically upstream from Israel, at the moment, the difference, the gap in the ability of Palestinians to develop wastewater treatment and reuse infrastructure at the scale that Israel has means a lot of this wastewater is left untreated, which first and foremost is a huge and massive inefficiency, because we know and we've heard today that we can, of course, reuse this water for irrigation. Secondly, because there is no infrastructure to collect this wastewater, very little sewage networks, and it's really thanks to Monther to try to rectify this issue. But still, a large proportion of the Palestinian population is simply not connected to a sewage network. And if you're not connected to a sewage network, then you cannot send your sewage to a treatment plant to be treated and reused. So what happens? This wastewater is drained into the environment and collects in our rivers and streams, which Alon also mentioned, meaning that we have an environmental problem in large-scale degradation of our streams, and these streams are all cross-border. So this is one area now that we at the Institute are beginning to focus our efforts on, both in terms of training for students, as well as, of course, in terms of research. And I also want to allude and thank Eric and Ken and American University, where we are developing a very, very interesting cooperation by bringing students from this school to help us to realize the broader aspects of this work beyond the technology, and that, of course, as Eric has said before, the peace dividend to this type of work. So the challenges are an example of this challenge is if you look at water as it's supposed to be, water should be looked at and managed from the point of view of the watershed. That's the spatial scale that we should be focusing on, and ignoring as much as is realistically possible the political borders, which invariably do not conform to the watershed. So we have here what is known as the Hebron, Besor, Beersheba watershed. Unfortunately, there isn't one name. And you can see that the upstream portion of this watershed lies within the West Bank, the southern West Bank, the largest city being, of course, Hebron. The watershed then continues into Israel and eventually drains into the Mediterranean Sea. Now, what I want you to focus on, if you can see the widths of the various lines there that indicate flow. Now, under natural conditions, this watershed should only have water during the rainy season. In other words, this is an ecologically ephemeral or seasonal system. But what we are showing in this map is that we have perennial flow in the system, indicated by the different lines, and that perennial flow is untreated wastewater. Where is this wastewater coming from? There are three main sources of non-point source, major sources. Wow, okay, that certainly makes no sense. I should have written major sources of non-point source pollution. Excuse me. I think I put the slide together at 6 o'clock in the morning, so excuse me. But I'm to blame, anyway. Anyway, the issue here is that we have a very challenging wastewater stream in this watershed because there are three main industrial sources of wastewater. The picture on the top left is the stone cutting or the marble cutting or the marble shaping industry in the southern Hebron. This is a very, very important economical industry for the Palestinians, but it's very, very water intensive. So what you can see in the picture is one of these very large overhead saws that cut the marble blocks, but they use an incredible amount of water to cool the saws. And we generate a very thick stone slurry. All the dust that comes off of the marble is literally dumped with any treatment or any settling directly into the environment. And it's being done that way because there isn't a infrastructure to receive that wastewater. The picture on the right demonstrates another very important economic activity in Palestine, and that is olive oil production. And what we see here in this pool is simply olive oil waste draining into the environment. And this creates a very, very problematic source of seasonal wastewater pollution because when they have the olive oil picking season in October, November, you can literally see a black source of wastewater draining into the environment because of the heavy organic fatty acids in the wastewater. And the third source of problematic wastewater, the third picture there, is to show you the outcome of wastewater from leather tanning. Again, this is a very important economic activity for Palestine. But the challenge here with leather tanning is the reliance on a range of chemicals to soften the leather. Some of these chemicals are known carcinogenics, such as chromium-3 and chromium-6. And I have data that show that we have this, both sources of chromium way beyond the standard in the watershed on the Palestinian side and on the Israeli side. So this is just giving you some of the examples. Now, in terms of technology, I would like to say that there really is not yet an effective technological solution to treating these sources of wastewater. There's been a lot of research, a lot of pilot programs, but conventional wastewater treatment plants cannot effectively treat these types of wastewater streams. So the critical barriers to addressing this issue is not actually the technology, because I think eventually we will find a solution, because there's nothing like a challenge to drive innovation. But the critical barriers are alluded to, as Monther said, to some of the political realities, and I just want to briefly run through those. So if we would like to say that there's an Israeli-Palestinian wastewater conflict, and by no means am I alluding to that this is a conflict that in any way is at the level of violence, but we do have a conflict. There are disagreements here, there are difficulties, and these are some of the challenges. Firstly, Israel adopts, rightly so, the pollution pays principle. But that works when Israel is looking to enforce its environmental policies on Israeli industries. But the Israeli policy also stretches beyond the Green Line and is applied unilaterally to the Palestinians. So when this wastewater crosses the Green Line, Israel will unilaterally, and is required to meet its own environmental standards, treat as much as it can this wastewater. But it does it unilaterally and charges the Palestinians for the cleanup. The other challenge is Palestinian capacity. As I've mentioned previously, there is limited sewage infrastructure. This means that most Palestinian cities and towns and factories are reliant on septic tanks, which are really, in many cases, simple holes in the ground, which of course are very, very inefficient. And therefore the outcome is very little treatment and reuse, as well as challenges that the Palestinian government faces in terms of regulation and enforcement. Now, we do have Oslo, as we know, and Oslo has created the Joint Water Committee, similar to what we have with Israel and Jordan, but really this committee hardly functions anymore. There are huge gaps in trust between the parties to really get anything done. And when it comes to wastewater treatment, the level of investment required to build large-scale treatment facilities in the West Bank and the insistence of Israel to connect the settlements simply makes this a very politically problematic issue. Area C, the division of the West Bank into A, B, and C, of course, is another challenge, and I'll show you that in the next slide. Israeli wastewater standards, which are now requiring all wastewater treatment facilities in the country to upgrade from secondary treatment to tertiary treatment, which of course will allow for unrestricted irrigation, is in many cases being applied, or the Israeli decision-makers are insisting that the Palestinians meet the standards. But again, how can the Palestinians do that when there is such a gap in terms of capacity? And of course, we have international law, which also in some ways tells us how we should be governing wastewater. And even though Israel takes a unilateral approach to try to treat some of this wastewater, by international law, it cannot or it should not be then getting the benefit of reusing that wastewater. Now, here you see a map of the West Bank, and of course the clear division, or the outcome of Oslo, was the division of the West Bank into areas A, B, and C, as I'm sure most of us know. The yellow is A, which is under full Palestinian control, and what A actually reflects is the urban areas of Palestine. So we're talking about probably 80% of the Palestinian population is under their own government. But the fractured nature of the landscape makes simple planning very, very challenging. And one of the challenges in planning is wastewater infrastructure. We do not, and we don't want to, and we invariably don't, install wastewater treatment facilities in urban centers for obvious reasons. So the best place to install a large-scale wastewater treatment facility, if there is the sewage network to receive that sewage, should be in Area C, which is outside of the urban areas, in places that are safe from contamination to the environment and are not going to create a public health hazard to the population. but Area C is under full Israeli jurisdiction, and this brings into the picture the Joint Water Committee and the issue of connecting settlements to these infrastructures. So the political ramifications here means that what many countries would take for granted in terms of planning and siting of such infrastructures in our situation is very, very problematic. And it's this reality that has led us, the Institute, to adopt different approaches, which I will elucidate on. But this is the result. So what we see here is the Hebron stream. And, well, you know, as I say, I don't have to say anything. You can see the consequences of untreated wastewater. What's that?
I said it's lucky it doesn't slip.
If you were there, you would smell it. This is not in the West Bank. This is in Israel, close to the Green Line, in a Bedouin village called Batin, which is actually very close to where I live. So besides the fact that this is something that is impacting everybody, and communities such as the Bedouin, by the way, are one of those that are most directly impacted, because this is passing right by the entrance to their village. This picture is taken in the West Bank, and here is a very good example in Area C of the stone slurry waste. So you can see the milky white color of the wastewater. This is an excellent example of how the wastewater that is being generated upstream in Hebron and around is simply draining into the river downstream. Now here again, you can see some of the challenges. Obviously, environmentally, this should be unacceptable. But secondly, here again are Bedouins grazing their sheep in this wastewater. And then what happens to the sheep afterwards? Mansaf, okay? Right, you're going to eat it. And so think about, again, the issues here in terms of health ramifications. And why are these goats and sheep being watered in this stream? Because there's no other water. So again, as far as I'm concerned, this is an unacceptable situation, and we have to find a way to resolve this. The question is, will it be possible, at least in the near term, to resolve this at the level of governments, which of course is necessary, or are there other alternatives to at least beginning to address this issue, given the political reality on the ground? I'll move forward. So I'll run through it quickly. So we want to therefore promote a watershed-based approach, which requires, again, trying to move beyond the realities of political borders, which ignore the watershed realities, to engage all the parties despite the politics. And there are many and varied stakeholders in this specific watershed. We have the Palestinians, for example, the stonecutters, Israelis, farmers, the Bedouin. And the first stage of any type of restoration to try to address the issue in terms of wastewater management is data. And unfortunately, collecting data on both sides of the Green Line is very, very challenging, but we cannot really move forward unless we have verifiable, defensible data to really understand what is going on. So we've begun to do this at the Institute in collaboration with our Palestinian partners. What you see here is, firstly, who's living in the watershed? Where are they? And you can see that in terms of geographic area, most of the watershed is in Israel, but most of the population is Palestinian. We've begun to develop, install in-stream monitoring stations on both sides of the border, and this is in cooperation with Ben Gurion University, both where Alon works at Stable Care, but also the Department of Geography in Beersheba. It's a very messy business to install these sensors, and again, you can see the gray mud there is all the remnants of the slurry. I can tell you that we all left there with rashes on our skin, especially my student that I'm telling to dig deeper and dig deeper. And he had no choice because he was my student. But then we're all very happy at the end of the day, and we are able to install these monitoring stations. Another important part of our work is to do grab samples, specifically in the Palestinian areas. These are two of my Palestinian students, Layla from East Jerusalem, and Zubaida from Akko, doing grab samples and water quality analysis. Layla is a master's student at Stable Care. This is some of the results of that work. And what I want to show you here is a comparison of the water quality to the INBAR standards. The INBAR standards are the Israeli water quality standards for effluent discharge into streams. And just look at the highlighted examples of sodium, COD, and TSS, and you can see that these figures are by orders of magnitude beyond the standard, whether it be in the upper catchment in the West Bank or in the lower catchment in Israel. Now, this is very significant because this is the first time that such a database is being developed that is providing us with a watershed-based level of data. And this is essential when we come to think about, okay, how are we going to address this issue? How are we going to minimize the non-point source pollution? What are the options? The data is really the first step. So there are promising approaches, and this is where I'll wrap things up, to promote within Area A, where we can operate, and we do not require Israeli authority, on-site wastewater treatment and reuse. Now, one of the actual advantages of the reliance of the majority of the Palestinian population on septic tanks, or holding tanks really, is the purposeful separation of black water and grey water in the buildings, in the homes. They do this because they don't want to overwhelm the septic tanks. So they literally, they build with separation of black and grey. We all know what black water and grey water is? Black water, water that goes into your toilets. Grey water is everything else that you produce. And 70% of a home's wastewater is grey water. That means if you can capture that water and treat and reuse, again, you're improving massively the options of efficiency. And here's an example simply of how you could take a very simple technology, take the grey water, treat it, use it for things like garden irrigation, and even with some level of sophistication, send that water back into the home for toilet flushing. I mean, just think about toilets for a second. There is no rationale or sense in taking fresh water and dumping your wastes in it. It's just ridiculous. 4 gallons of flush for the average toilet in the United States. Doesn't make any sense. This is the approach that we have developed, which is a very simple constructed wetland approach that is a scalable modular design where we use gravel filtration, the biofilter, that can take the grey water and treat it to a high enough level for irrigation. Here we are working with Netafim that we heard about earlier, taking their drip irrigation kits that they presented and connecting it to these systems. This is an example of one of the systems that we built in a town near Hebron called Khalkhul. You can see there's some of the parameters. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to keep going. I'm out of time. Okay. There's the grey water connection. All right. Very easy. The grey water is there. We just simply plug it in, and away we go. No plumbing required. All right. There's the gravel filtration monitoring. That's the result. Okay. And don't read this. Just look at the underlying point. Is that there also is the economic opportunities of saving water and providing a good quality source of water for irrigation. But of course the challenges remain: acceptability of this approach by farmers, affordability by the users themselves, scaling it up, dissemination of the idea and the approach, which of course requires capacity building education, sustainability, and of course the politics will always be there, and we can't really ignore it. Okay, I'm done. Thank you.
Okay, so my name is Heather Spate, and I have the distinct honor of being able to speak on behalf of the Practicum team about the experience that we had last summer. It really was fantastic, and we are very lucky to have had the partnerships that we worked with and the various people that were involved in it. So I wanted to make sure I just took a minute to recognize them via slide. So we're very thankful, and we had a great time, and hopefully, so I'll speak on behalf of the team, but certainly there are team members here, and they will have more to say about it as well. So thank you for allowing me to be here today. So the first thing that we'll look at here is why is it important for us to look at water cooperation and peace. So we've talked a lot about water and the nature of water and some of the transcendent properties that make water really interesting. So then what also becomes interesting is why look at cooperation and peace. Well, in the case of this initiative, we've got an Israeli organization and a Palestinian organization working together towards a development priority and cooperating on a development aim. So what if we use a peace-building lens to look at it? Because there is some tension in the area, because occasionally the area is characterized by conflict. So what do we learn if we apply this lens to it? What else can we glean from the project and what the cooperation is leading to. So what I'm going to do is take just a few minutes to just frame the research that we did, and then 3 key insights, and then conclude. So our research objective was this: what is the peace-building significance of small-scale transboundary greywater reuse projects implemented through the partnership between Arava and PWEG? It's a very long title, but basically there was a partnership happening, and we wanted to look at what's the peace-building significance of this partnership. So that's what we were trying to do. So we created a research framework for that. But our first step was to look at the existing body of literature on this. And what we turned to is something called environmental peace building. And environmental peace building says that when we are trying to manage natural resources, we might be able to create a space for collaboration that's outside of the political sphere, that's outside of the economic sphere, and can be another space to engage, to create dialogue, and to create connections and cooperation. So that seemed like a natural place for us to situate this work. So then we created a framework for looking at these things. And the key things to keep in mind are this. The first thing we looked at is the environmental significance of this project as a development aim. And then after that, we looked at peace building, and we used 3 pathways. The first pathway is the project promoting equity? Is the project promoting relationship building? Or is the project promoting changes in perceptions of others? So those are the ways that we started to look at peace building and to see what else we could learn from the initiative. So what data did we use? How did we funnel through the information through this network that we've created for ourselves? So our research at a glance, I'll just point out a few very specific things. So one thing to keep in mind is that we looked at over 115 sources before we left for the region, which took a month or 2 months depending on when people started, but approximately a month before, in some cases 2 for others. We were in the region for approximately 10 days engaging in rapid appraisal. We visited 9 sites, 8 in the Palestinian West Bank and 1 in Israel. And we collected data from 49 research participants. The report is available online. There's going to be a slide at the end to show it if you're interested in seeing it. So we have that there now, but don't worry about scribbling it in now if you're interested. We'll have that slide at the very end if you would like to see it. So we developed I'm going to frame the insights in 3 areas. First, under Palestinian development priorities, partnerships as a model, and space for positive synergy. So the first thing that we want to reflect back that we heard from our participants again and again is that this off-the-grid gray water treatment and reuse may not always address Palestinian development needs. Now, one thing that we heard, there's 2 ideas that we heard. First, it does circumvent the intractable high-level politics. So in some ways, one of the things that was often said is, well, we'd like to be able to do something, and this is something we can do. So we aren't going to sit, we're going to try something out here, and we're going to see where it goes and see where it takes us. So in that way, we're able to move forward. But at the same time, it might not be a permanent solution. Many people are interested in being a part of centralized systems, and this is a decentralized approach. It's in one person's home or 2 people's home, depending on how the system's set up. It's not a part of a centralized network. So it may not address development priorities. But let's look at what it can do in a peace-building arena. So one thing is, what I wrote here is countering the dominant narrative. Here's what I mean by that. So one thing that's really interesting is this. So sometimes what you might hear in conversation, actually let's back up a little bit. Sometimes what we look at with peace building work is this, that there are structures and institutions and conversations that happen every single day that make something more conflictual or less conflictual, depending on how the conversations go. And sometimes we get so used to a conversation that we don't even think about it. We just say the same thing again and again, and it might actually be perpetuating a problem. So what we have here is this. In this partnership, we see something really interesting. We see an example of sometimes what you hear is, well, Palestinians are not capable of being environmental stewards. Sometimes what you hear is Israelis and Palestinians can't work together, can't build relationships, and can't build partnerships. So here's what's really interesting. When you hear that, you can think in your mind of this initiative, which directly counters that. And that starts to change what the conversation looks like. And that's a very valuable thing that can happen. So when you hear that, you can point to this initiative as a starting place and think about how can it happen again. So then that also makes this partnership interesting because you can look at, as a case study, what are the things that make this partnership work well, and what are the things that could be replicated in other areas. The last thing that I'm going to talk about here is what we're going to call space for positive synergies. And when we go back to that original definition of environmental peace building, what we're looking at is a space for dialogue, a space to be able to change things. And in this case, this project does in fact create that space. Even in fact, the fact that we're here today sharing our research tells you that it's creating a space for positive synergy. So for example, what we've noticed though is that epistemic communities, so communities of practice or communities of scientists, those are the groups that are currently most involved in these kind of initiatives. And really we could stand to spread that out a little bit and have a little bit more people involved. Another thing we noticed is that at this point, it's a lot of what we call mid-level actors or elites or people of position of some kind that are benefiting from these technologies or this particular initiative. So what you get from that is a couple of things. Sorry, well, let's back it up a little one more time. So what we'll notice is this. So when you have the same people involved again and again in a project, it gives you some great opportunities for long-term planning. And it gives you some great opportunities for trust building, all of which need to move forward in order to enhance peace building. But at the same time, what you lose is the ability to engage new actors, to be involved in new things, to create flexibility in your networks and those types of things. So in this case, what we also recommended and noted were there are a few ways where we could create a more inclusive space that extends beyond the epistemic community and the mid-level actors. One really clear way we could do this is a gender analysis. So there are a lot of opportunities that in both organizations have women in high positions within the organization and also engaged females in the process of working on these projects. So what we could do though is formalize that through a gender analysis. That's another way to engage actors. Additionally, there's outreach strategies that we could recommend related to, depending, I guess, on the direction you want to take things, and that's going to be context specific. So an example might be talking more about water identities and transboundary identities and how we're all in this together and we have a common identity around water, or talking about benefits and consequences and how to distribute those evenly. So those areas for outreach, those can vary depending on what your context is and who specifically you're working with. So one thing that I wanted to close with, though, which I think was key for me while I was in the space, and I think probably key for others, was a comment that we heard from one of the research participants. And it's especially relevant when we think about this idea of creating an inclusive environment and an inclusive community. It says here, I'm going to use ARVA and PWEG, are building peace slowly, working to place stone upon stone, and it cannot be rushed. So we certainly understand that, and so that's where we see some of the ideas about how to place the next set of stones and where to move forward from there. Again, if you're interested in looking at the report, very importantly, the references and the sources that we used in order to complete this research. This is the website, and I can actually keep that up. The last slide is just a thank you. That's a repeat of the original one. Mm-hmm. So I'll put this one up as I walk back to my table. And, oops, just kidding. Yeah, there we go. I'll put that up as I walk back to the table. Thank you.
Good afternoon to you all. So I guess like Clive, I think you all know who I am at this point. So I suppose I'll just jump in. You know, I believe in cooperation. I think cooperation is is good practice in a conflictual environment. The Israel-Palestinian environment is a conflictual environment. And so when we talk about water-based cooperation, transboundary cooperation, environmental-related practices, we recognize that a lot of those environmental practices take place within transboundary environments. As we saw, some of the streams, and there are close to 20 streams, we say, that cross between Palestine and Israel. And so anyone who addresses issues related to those streams needs to recognize the transboundary and conflictual nature of that transboundary space. And also, of course, needs to engage with the politics of the issue. So I have the, in a sense, I have that conversational space and conversational moment to share some insights about cooperating in conflict environments, because it's not enough to just get together, right? And we certainly appreciate a lot of the people-to-people work that has happened over the years during the period of Oslo, and that's built relationships between people that many of those relationships last to this very day, and that's certainly much appreciated. But it's also important to look at some of the way in which the cooperation takes place, formally, structurally, politically, and then also we call the political economy of cooperation, which is who benefits from cooperation, and can we talk about equitable benefit sharing from cooperation. And so I put those questions out into the room as I reflect upon the work that Clive and Munter are doing, and bearing in mind that that cooperative work is cooperative work that also a lot of other people are doing. Friends of the Earth Middle East, and the work that they do brings together Israelis, Palestinians, and Jordanians. And those guys are working the same way Clive and Munter are working, trying to build, if you will, a partnership among equals. Now, it's hard to say that in the context of a conflictual environment because their power, their mobility, their resources, the constraints that they need to deal with are a little bit different. But within the organizations and within the projects themselves, they build partnerships where they cultivate equality. And they try to derive equitable benefits from those partnerships. And they try and build a shared sense of sustainability. So as Heather was saying earlier on, the fact that the continued occupation of the West Bank is not justifiable because Palestinians are not environmental stewards. In fact, we can't use that language because it doesn't reflect the reality on the ground. I think we need to go a little bit beyond some of the political language to get to what happens, in fact, on the ground. The Palestinians involved in Friends of the Earth Middle East are engaged in sustainable practices around environmental resource governance. People at PWEG, and there are, as I say, dozens of projects and many people involved. And they cooperate together in conflictual and very difficult environments, and they cross borders. They need to deal with issues that are conflictual issues like stigma and stereotype. It's very difficult to be that person who crosses borders constantly and then needs to come back to their community to justify that somehow they're not transgressing their national obligations and identities. And I think that, as Israelis, as Palestinians, as whoever else practices environmental peacebuilding and cooperation in conflictual environments. And, engaging, if you will, in transboundary environmental cooperation somewhere is a choice. And it's a choice to engage in a relationship with other. It's very difficult, very challenging, but I think quite necessary. And it does carry us through some of the darkest times. I remember very clearly when, in October 2000, the Second Palestinian Intifada escalated. I remember feeling, like some other people in the field, that we are going from a place of some hope to a place of quite a lot of concern, fear, and uncertainty, and where are we going to go with this? And I do also remember in 2002 and then 2006 seeing some of the work that, and being involved in some of the work as well, that people like Clive and others were engaged in, and they were carrying us through that moment when the Oslo process was fragmented, and then fell apart. And we're perpetuating, if you will, this idea that by working together and building relationships and engaging in innovative visioning and practice on the ground, they could help us get through the dark moments and move into some innovative practice. And their work was supported by a grant at the time from NATO, the Science for Peace program, that engaged and challenged Israelis, Palestinians, Jordanians, and internationals to really think about how we can bring a peaceable quality to water cooperation. It's not enough simply to cooperate around water resources, but that needs to be done with some intentionality. So where can we go for inspiration for some of that intentionality? you know, on the one hand, there's the water literature that talks about cooperation around water as inherently peaceful, and there's the other sort of end of the literature, which talks about water cooperation as rooted in hydrohegemony, which basically means that you have one dominant actor, one subjugated actor, and that cooperation is in fact, you know, violently relational. So what can we sort of derive from, you know, this kind of spectrum of analysis? Well, we have something called conflict sensitivity. Okay? And I think that helps us, in fact, look at what we're doing. How does our water cooperation, how is our water cooperation pursued with conflict sensitivity? And what does that mean? Well, on the one hand, it means how can we do it without doing any harm? Right? And I think everybody can appreciate the idea that you want to engage in you know, water resources governance, water development, cooperation in a way that does no harm. Okay? So it has us thinking about what does that mean? Well, if we do things unilaterally, then we don't really know what it means to do no harm. We have ideas about it. We can try to project those ideas, but it helps to be in partnership and to be in a partnership among equals so that together we can decide what it means to do no harm. Okay? Now, the other piece of conflict sensitivity is, in fact, about peace building. So it's not only trying to do no harm, but it's in fact taking us forward and intentionally addressing some of the issues that we want to address and doing so together, and in fact building the future so that we can, for instance, share benefits. Okay? So what does it mean to share benefits? Well, I know what benefits are for my society. I know what I consider to be a benefit, but I don't know, I might have ideas, what it means for your society to benefit from the work that I do, but maybe what I'm doing, in fact, is creating conflict. Maybe what I'm doing is, in fact, undermining what you consider to be peaceable or peaceful or a benefit. Right? If there's more water in a community, well, we might think that's a good idea, but what if it isn't such a good idea? Because what if it empowers certain segments of society and undermines others? Right? How can we work together in having a conversation so that together we're clear that what we're doing together brings benefit to both of our communities? So we're not projecting, and we're not imposing, and we're not undermining. We're in fact building together, doing no harm, and engaging in peace building together. This is conflict sensitivity. Now, you know, I worked on the Red Sea Dead Sea Conveyance Initiative. I worked on the peace and conflict impact assessment of that initiative. I called it a conflict and peace effects study. And, you know, essentially what what we learn from the Red Sea Dead Sea Conveyance is that, you know, again, more water doesn't necessarily mean more peace. Now, it's hard to kind of grasp that when we think that more water, you know, is in a resource scarce or a resource stressed society a good idea, and it certainly is. But what if more water, taking water from the Red Sea and building a canal and going to the Dead Sea and dumping the water in the Dead Sea with Israelis, Palestinians, and Jordanians, and everybody cooperating together, and that sounds like quite a good idea. But the fact is that the Dead Sea, 25% of the shoreline of the Dead Sea is in the West Bank. It's in Area C. And that area is in fact occupied territory, which needs to come to some kind of, you know, solution. So if you change the Dead Sea, right, without all the beneficiary parties agreeing together, then that's conflictual. And originally, the Red Dead was a Jordanian-Israeli project in 2002, right? Until someone said, wait a minute, what about the Palestinians? In fact, the Palestinians said, wait a minute, what about the Palestinians? That was a key moment. There are other key moments like it, and I don't have time, nor do I desire to go through this, but it's to say that more water, which was the original vision of the Red Dead that would save the Dead Sea, and that's a whole other question, okay? But that year, that more water was not necessarily more peaceful, okay? Because it was going to change a body of water in an occupied land without the agreement of the people who will be directly affected by it. International law of water resources states that if you're going to change a body of water, then you need to involve the stakeholders, you need to be transparent, you need to tell people about it, right? And if there's a dispute, it needs to be resolved. And if nobody can agree, then it needs to go to arbitration where someone else decides for you. All of this to say that It's about the quality of the relationship. It's not only about the quantity of water. Friends of the Earth Middle East, I just have one more minute, and then I will complete this. Friends of the Earth Middle East has not long ago said that we have a strategic moment of more water. The Red Dead conveyance will generate, I mean, now it's going to generate 200 million cubic meters of water. It may generate as much as 850 million cubic meters of fresh water over the years. It's being conducted in a staged approach, which I think is a wise approach. Now, Friends of the Earth Middle East has said, desalination provides us with a strategic opportunity, provides Israel with a strategic opportunity as the dominant power in the region. There's, to change the water governance regime. Okay? The current water plan in Israel is a plan that over the next 20 years, and I've seen the plan and I've looked at the plan, over the next 20 years, Israel will sell water to the Palestinians in a way that will not at all change the contemporary water governance arrangements in the area, which means that the water that the Palestinians have jurisdiction over today will remain the same. Water that the Israelis have jurisdiction over will remain the same. The Jordan River is inaccessible to the Palestinians. That will remain the same. Nothing will change, except that there will be more water in the region and that Israel will position itself to sell more water to the Palestinians. And Israel perceives that as a beneficial and quite a peaceful approach. But again, let's go back to the principle. You might think that that's peaceful, but if the other partner says it's not such a good idea, then you need to reconsider that and together define what it means to generate benefits, what it means to incorporate that water into a regional or a bilateral, we can talk about the details, regime where all the partners are involved and share as partners in defining what is good for everybody and how they want to engage in this water governance into the future. So I think the Red Dead and others see Israel as very much an empowered actor within this. I think we all can agree that Israel is an empowered water governing actor in the region, and as the empowered actor generally, I think has the power to create political space for the type of conversations that can take us forward to in fact happen. So to conclude, I'm inspired by the cooperative practices of those who on the ground engage in partnerships that try to build equality among them, try to derive equitable benefits where they do it together and they're in constant conversation. And I think we actually have much to learn, not only from what they do, but also from how they do it. Thank you. Sure, yeah, okay.
So Laura, let me just clarify. So how long do we have the room until? We don't know. Okay. So our original plan had been to have this panel and a Q&A and then move into more of a kind of a roundtable discussion format. I think what we're going to do is merge the Q&A and at some point evolve it into the wider conversation rather than artificially separate those.
20 more minutes, does that?
Okay, so we'll start with Q&A and we'll circle back and we'll do what we do. So we'll collect a few as we've been doing, collect 3 at a time or so and go from there. Please.
Do we have a microphone?
Yeah.
So I have a question about the role of privilege in the local level of environmental peacebuilding activities. In some ways, this is a continuation of the analysis that Eric just made, but start again? Okay. So my question is about the role of privilege in the local peacebuilding activities. In some ways, it's a continuation of the point that Eric just made about asymmetry of power relationships. But it takes that question or that issue from the kind of macro level that Eric described it down to the level of what happens in a project like the one that the team did in the summer. So I have to also make a disclaimer about this. I'm broadly supportive of environmental peace building as an activity. and I am very impressed with all that I've heard here. But I've been around York University long enough so that the critical academics who talk about things like privilege have kind of put a vocabulary into my mind. So when I think about privilege, two practical questions come to my mind. One is crossing the border. When the team is visiting the West Bank in Israel, it's privileged. It crosses the border easily. Israelis who were involved in these projects cross the border easily. Palestinians, I don't know, you can tell me from your experience what it's like to cross the border, because there are border controls and and you know the issues around border controls. The second issue is the issue of vulnerability. As you know, there is a very strong rhetoric within Palestinian society, Jordanian society, and elsewhere in the Middle East around anti-normalization, non-cooperation with Israelis. And people who are involved in joint projects with Israelis have to stand up to this rhetoric and put them in. The Israelis can go back to a relatively secure position, but within Palestinian society, there are vulnerabilities. So how do the Palestinians deal with that vulnerabilities? Are they present in the work that you do, and how do your teams deal with those things?
Okay, short question. The first one, I didn't hear about Egypt. Is it possible to transfer water from the Nile River to Gaza Strip as part of the solution? This is question number one. Question number two is, what about the ancient water, the trap in Sinai and maybe Arava Valley that I read about a big reservoir of ancient water under the Sinai Desert. Is it part of the solution? And who will use it? It's now part of the water is under the Egypt. The third one, JNF is a project or had a project of reservoir collecting rainwater to a big reservoir. Is it any part of the solution, or it's small percentage of amount that will not make any changes? Because in the slides that we saw of the Psor and Eshkol River that go to Gaza Strip, we saw a big area that the rainfall and the water go to the sea. By creating a lot of reservoir, maybe it can be part of the solution. Thanks.
Take one more and then we'll circle back to the, please.
Yeah, this is a question for Clive. The problem with the marble cutting, the tannery, and the olive oil, is that a problem? I think you said there's no known solution. Is that because there's no sewage network that connects to these enterprises? Or are you saying that it's a matter of science? We do not know how to clean this water and send it back to the environment?
So we'll start with your question. I actually meant both. The reality in our region is that we have no ability to. There's no network, right? So all that wastewater is just being drained into the environment. From the point of the science, it's also correct is that there isn't yet a viable, economically efficient response on a large-scale level to treat this type of wastewater. What is being done in other parts of the world is to divert that wastewater stream into settling pools, for example. So with olive oil waste, because it's seasonal, if you have, again, the infrastructure in place, you can take those sources of wastewater and divert them into settling pools, which keeps them out of the drainage, out of the watershed. You allow as much of the water to evaporate, then you have the olive oil sludge or waste that you can do things with, like converting it to soaps. There are uses that you could do, but the real challenge is having large-scale wastewater treatment facilities deal with those waste streams, and that's a problem. Most wastewater treatment. I'm doing good, right? That's the centralized wastewater treatment systems are not really designed conventional to deal with these types of problematic wastewater streams. In our situation, it's both. There's that challenge, which is a challenge for the United States as much as for anybody else, and the fact of the lack of infrastructure and the lack of governance to at least collect that stuff and prevent it from going into the environment.
On the question of border crossing.
Okay. Of course, let's say working on environmental issues is also always a privilege. First of all, for the beneficiaries, not for the actors. Making good use of the technologies and the know-how is at the end for the benefit of the target group of any environmental action, so of both populations, Palestinians and Israelis. We are so close to each other that if there will be any health problem in Ramallah, you will get it in Tel Aviv or in the neighboring Israeli community within 5 minutes. So, and vice versa. So this is the real privilege, I think, for which we shall all work. To this regard, as technicians and researchers, I don't see any problem. Industrial people, researchers, other civil societies, there's no problem. The problem and the constraints, let's say, are coming from the politicians. This morning, Alan Tal or somebody else, I don't remember, this morning, sorry, he was talking about a complete and sudden change in the behavior and in the concept which is transferred to the population. First, we have no water, we have water scarcity, and now we have a lot of water to sell even to neighbors. How happens? It happened by a quick political decision deciding and constructing further desalination plants. So should the governments and the politicians wake up and work for real and equitable and just solutions for environmental issues, I think much more and concrete and real privilege will be achieved, especially for the two nations. Yeah, but you talked also about crossing the borders, you know.
Mm-hmm.
If I don't know, I didn't get exactly what you mean, but if I got you correctly, you know, crossing the borders are problematic for both parties. So perhaps, it's problematic for us Palestinians, but it is also problematic for the Israelis. And this is again.
The Israelis control the borders.
Sorry?
The Israelis control the borders.
Yeah, of course. Israel is controlling the borders, and it doesn't make it that easy. I recall 2 years ago I had to participate in a workshop together with the Arab Institute. There was our water minister in Geneva, in Italy. I was at 8 o'clock at the crossing border with Jordan at King Hussein Allenby, so-called Allenby Bridge, and I was sent back. They said, okay, we have closed this evening half an hour before. So I lost the day after the airplane, and I lost the whole conference. Me and my colleague, we were supposed to participate, but we couldn't. So control of borders make it always difficult and make it problematic to us. Again, this is political responsibility of the occupying power of the territories, which is the Israeli government, who shall really wake up and work properly on not only easing the cross-border of environmentalists, but all people. Strict restriction of movement does not make good to the economy of both parties. You need to sell your products, we need to buy it, and vice versa. But these, again, are political, artificial decisions.
I just want to mention, for those that may not be familiar, the only border crossing to the outside world for Palestinians of the West Bank is the Allenby crossing in Jordan. If any Palestinian wants to travel abroad, they first have to cross by foot from the West Bank, from an area controlled by Israel, through what is called the Allenby crossing into Jordan. They have to pay both the Israeli and the Jordanian customs officials at that crossing, and then they have to travel about 2 hours from that crossing to the airport, the Queen Queen Alia Airport outside of Amman, and from there they can then reach any destination. So think about approximately close to around 3 million, or around the 3 million around. The only access to the outside world is through one border crossing, one land crossing.
Yeah, I was just going to add some observations that we noticed when we were in the field related to some of these issues of privilege. One thing that I looked at when I was trying to do some of the research had to do with the power of voice. So who has the ability to tell their story, and how often is the story heard? And we did notice some real differences in terms of who could very easily tell a story and who expressed that we've told this 10,000 times and nothing's really happening with it, so why would I bother to tell it again? And so in that way, we start to interface with privilege in terms of whether or not we have a voice on the stage, and then if so, does anything come of it? And so in some cases, it seemed like some of our Palestinian respondents expressed frustration about not really having that voice on a larger platform where they could be a part of change, and that in some cases they may need a conduit, somebody to do that for them, and that wasn't necessarily expressed so clearly as an issue for the Israelis that we talked with. Another way that we kind of ran into this issue had to do with some of the reasons why some of these water projects might be interesting. And so, for example, in one of the places that we worked in, there were some Israeli respondents that commented on how this would create some recreational opportunities because the water would be cleaner and we could have bike trails and things like that, which is the right to play is recognized by the United Nations, so it's a very important thing. At the same time, so is also the right to water and sanitation. And other respondents, Palestinian respondents, often commented on wanting to be a part of this in order to address basic human dignity issues. So in that way, you do start to see and uncover some of the challenges associated with privilege when we think of why people are involved, and also how much voice they actually have in order to have change happen.
Yeah, on the point about privilege and vulnerability, which is a very powerful question. So I didn't travel with the student team, but I worked with them with some of their findings when they came back. And one of the things I was really struck by was the extent to which many of the Palestinians who today spoke did not frame this in terms of peace. They framed it in other terms: justice, human dignity, sustainability, benefit sharing. And I think there's a couple of different ways that you can read that. One is, as I think was kind of the implication of what you said, and I would agree, there are certain kind of narratives around peace that are themselves privileged frames. We have everything else we want, so we want peace. But another way of reading it, I think, is that people are finding a space, given the vulnerabilities you alluded to work in these projects by framing them in terms that do work. And I think it's that kind of creating of space that would be the hopeful aspect of projects such as these. That's my take on it.
I just actually say one very quick thing also, is really to convey a very brief story about a colleague, an Israeli colleague who works in facilitating Israeli-Palestinian environmental related dialogues. And he said to me, he said, you know, when I facilitate these dialogues where there are Israelis and Palestinians, the Israelis take up a lot of space. They have a lot of experience. They come from research institutes that are well funded. They engage with international partners constantly. And they, he said, and it only comes in a sense naturally to those people with much experience, wisdom, and knowledge to share that experience. Of course, the flip side is that in a dialogue, you need to share space and you need to listen to the other. And so as a facilitator, okay, as a facilitator who is aware of their own privilege within this dialogue, what they intentionally do is facilitate a dialogue that shifts power and that creates more space within those dialogues for the Palestinian voice to come through, the Palestinian concerns to be raised in the Palestinian framings. And so it doesn't become a question of who has more scientific knowledge. It becomes a question of the legitimacy of the knowledge and the insights that are derived from that knowledge sharing and experience sharing process in the room. So it's not just about which science is better, it's about, in fact, a meeting of those worldviews and what we can learn from and how to build on that.
And we had the question. question on Egypt and the Nile, Gaza?
So to your questions, I don't think there's any realistic option to think about taking water from Egypt to Israel via the Nile. In terms of the aquifer that has been thought to exist under the Negev, including the Sinai Peninsula, there are two issues. One is the water is brackish, of lower quality, so the question is it worth the economic investment to access that water, given again the onset of desalination as an alternative for much better quality water. And the other aspect of that is that this is a non-renewable aquifer. So at some point, again, it's water that will eventually, not be there. So I don't think at this point, at least from my know, in terms of Israel, that there's any real. The water is there. We know the hydrologists, the geologists know that it's there. I don't think at this point there's any decision to in any way access this aquifer. And then you also said something about about storage, rainwater harvesting, flood runoff harvesting, flash flood harvesting is relevant, but at a very local level. So in the Arava, when we have flash floods, we do have some storage reservoirs, and really what we do with that, we actually use that water as a way to balance the solutes in the brackish groundwater. So we do some mixing so that we can actually improve the quality at quite a low price for irrigation. Generally speaking, large-scale catchments in a water-scarce area is not really very, I don't think, will have a major impact to overall water supply. But at a local level, absolutely, most Palestinians, Jordanians collect rainwater on their roofs, and that can help them offset some of the costs, specifically in the summertime when water demand is greater.
So we take a few more questions, please.
I wanted to continue the questioning about the word vulnerability. I think what I wanted to approach also was the problem of stigma. Isn't there a stigma among the Palestinians if they cooperate? And how do you overcome that? Isn't it? Or maybe that's just what I hear from the international news.
Take a couple more questions.
I'll ask a question. If you're doing more wastewater treatment on residences in the A areas, the West Bank, doesn't that make the contamination much more concentrated in the water that flows out? Doesn't that make it more imperative to have facilities that treat that before you can do all that local harvesting at the home? Another question?
One more.
Does the issue, does the issue of how all of this could be financed ever come up that often? And I say that in the context of what I hear a lot here in Washington is if it is the difference between having a peace treaty or not, Washington will come up with the money. I mean, if this is a showstopper and the only question is who's going to pay for it, we'll be glad to pay for it. But on the other hand, if really this is just part of a much larger negotiation, if it's just one little piece of the puzzle, well, then there's a much larger bill out there that has to be dealt with. But in terms of, is this going to be financed by the Israeli taxpayers? Is it going to be financed by the Saudis? Is it going to be financed by some private entity? Doesn't strike me as being that difficult, but I'd like to know, in the course of the discussions, does anyone stand up and say, well, this is all great, but where are we going to get the money to actually do it?
So vulnerability and stigma, the Rich's question about the need for more comprehensive approaches, and financing. 3 easy questions. Where should we start? Do you want to start with the last question on financing?
No, actually, I want to
go with the last question on financing and then open up the bigger conversation with that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So, anybody?
Oh, okay. Well, it's depends what do you mean by risk of cooperation. Let's say, for I don't know how it is for an Israeli, but I could imagine talking with other Israeli colleagues. But for Palestinians to cooperate over technical environmental projects, from my own personal perspective, it is something to be appreciated. Let's say exchanging experience and benefiting from the experience of the others is necessary and has been made all through along the history. Nations are cooperations. Nations are handing over their know-how to other nations who brings it ahead. Of course, if we are cooperating over environmental technical issues for the benefit of our people, first of all, for the benefit of the environment and for the benefit of our nation and for the benefit of our authority, then why not? Of course, many people does not understand this, I'm sure, from both parties. I could talk about the Palestinian party. And sometimes we risk, and we risk high, especially if you don't have the space and the possibility to explain and to advocate. And this is something which we have to bear for our children, for our generations to come, and for our nation.
I think one of the sad realities that we face at the moment in our region is that there is a real ignorance between Israelis and Palestinians on the other. And I would lay the blame on the government. I think the governments are purposefully keeping the populations apart. And if you keep the populations apart, you just breed and maintain further ignorance and stigma or naivety on the basis of actual reality on what's happening on the other side. And I think that's really unfortunate. If you look at the agreements that have been signed, let's take Egypt and Jordan, which are considered to be peace agreements. I don't think that they're peace agreements. They are cessations of hostilities, and that's good. But it's not peace, because if it were peace, there'd be cultural exchange, there'd be technological exchange, there'd be sport exchange. There's no exchange. When we travel to Jordan, my friends think I'm crazy. I said, "You're going to Jordan? Why are you going to Jordan?" And I said, "But because we have a peace treaty with Jordan. Why shouldn't I go to Jordan? Why shouldn't you go to Jordan?" Israelis don't go to Jordan, and Jordanians hardly even come to Israel, partly because, back to the border question, because the Israelis make it practically impossible for Jordanians to come to Israel because of the very restrictive visa requirements. That's not peace. And that to me is a problem. That being said, I think what we're doing, and what we're demonstrating here with our partnership, and also what the work of the Arab Institute is doing by bringing students, young people, that's peace. As soon as you start to understand that your neighbor, your roommate, is no different from you, then who cares if they're Jewish or Arab? Then you're starting to do peace. But that's a long-term, bottom-up, literally person-by-person process. That's generational. But that hopefully will eventually give us peace. We must have an agreement by governments. But that's not I don't term that a peace treaty. I think that is a mechanism to resolve certain issues, but it's not peace, because if it were peace, you'd see a lot of real interaction happening on the ground. And until that happens, that stigma, I think, will just will remain and even could broaden, which I think is very problematic.
If I could just inject for a second that the displays that we see in the room were made by a multicultural team that included a woman from Ramallah and 3 Israelis, as well as someone from Vietnam and so on. So I think that the meeting can happen here in Washington, D.C. at American University.
So I know Eric is going to have something to say about the finance question in a moment, and there are people in the room more qualified to speak on financing than myself, including the man with the microphone. But I'll just make one observation. I think the question of who pays is fundamental, but it's not enough to frame it in those terms. It's also, what is the scale of investment that's required? what is the level of risk around the investment, and then what kinds of institutional mechanisms exist to fund that scale of investment at that level of risk. So there are very, very sort of micro level investments here. We've all seen the explosion in microfinance, right? So a woman in Bangladesh gets a $50 loan to buy a sewing machine, and she's got a livelihood. And there's a lot of innovation going at that scale. And so for very, very small household level demonstration projects and so on, I wouldn't say it's easy to put the funding together, but we're starting to see the institutionalization of mechanisms, bilateral foreign assistance and so on, to fund that. At the level of risky projects that are hundreds of millions of dollars and so on, we have the World Bank infrastructure and all that. But for years, there used to be a joke. It's easier to get a $100 million loan from the World Bank than to get 100 $1 million loans from the World Bank. And I think the thing that we're starting to see now, when you start talking about commercializing some of this technology, going to scale, creating distribution networks, that we're right in between those two levels, the very large and the very small, where financing mechanisms for risky projects are relatively well institutionalized, and we don't have, it's much more challenging to put it together so that these things can scale up from household level demonstration projects without going to the scale of Red Dead, which, just speaking personally, I think is not a resilient approach in a climate vulnerable era.
First of all, thank you to all the panelists for your insights. I'm going to ask you to stay here and maybe just squeeze a little bit closer together so we can invite a couple of people up here to continue the conversation and draw on other experience. Really ask you not to rush out, because one of the questions was not yet answered that was raised here, which was about finance. Okay, so one of the people that I'd like to invite up is Christopher Clark, who's with the Osprey Foundation, who in fact supports the kind of work that Clive and Munzer are engaged in. I'd like to invite Jeff Soslan, who's a professor here, who wrote a book called Cooperating Rivals that looks at Israelis and Jordanians and others who are cooperating and bringing great insight into how cooperation happens and how we can build on it. And then Alon Tal, who can stay here. You all know who he is, only because there's not that much space up there. And you'll help us answer some of these questions. So one of the questions that was asked, and this is really going to be a kind of a participatory dialogue. I'm going to defer occasionally to the people who are up here and other people in the room and circulate the microphone for your ideas and insights as well. So one of the questions that was asked was about financing cooperation and where that would come from. There's obviously many different scales, but we have someone here who has experience in doing so. I thought you'd share a couple of thoughts about that.
Sure, happy to do so. Greetings, pleasure to be here, and have found the proceedings today of great interest. I represent a private foundation that has mission interests in water as a social justice issue and in the promotion of interfaith and cross-cultural dialogue. You can imagine why the issue of water in the Middle East is of interest to this group. We are involved in a variety of small-scale projects on the ground, particularly in the West Bank. And the reason that I'm able to sit here today and talk to you about this at the relatively low scale of investment that the organization that I work with is making is because there is very little private money of any kind at the moment being invested in environmental issues, remediation, especially in the West Bank, right? There just aren't many people who are interested. There's tremendous suspicion of anything having to do with Palestinians across the United States. I think it's important for us to be honest about that. Therefore, there are needs that simply are not being met. When we decided to enter into this arena 5 years ago, it was simply a question of going online, finding out who the actors were, and getting in touch with them. There were very few barriers to actually connecting with people. And we began with Palestinian NGOs that we wanted to build a working relationship with. And one of the things we learned quite quickly is that many of those Palestinian organizations had active collaborative relationships with Israeli organizations, and they quickly became our partners as well. The scale of financing for on-the-ground projects is relatively low. The advantage that private funds like foundation money can bring at this point is that small foundations are less risk averse than large groups. They're prepared to fail, they're prepared to back small scale projects that don't pan out on the assumption that some of them will. And if and when those projects are identified, we will look along with our partners towards somebody who has enough muscle to actually scale those kinds of technologies or approaches up. If I can take just one more second, I want to say something about this issue of stigma and the degree to which people are willing, especially on the Palestinian side, to cooperate or, in this case, to engage with Americans who are interested in supporting this activity. I think it's important for us to understand that the people we're talking about today represent only one part of a much larger polity, and that not everyone, unfortunately, is prepared to engage in cooperative activities. Some organizations that, in fact, do fine work environmentally, with which my organization has connections, are keen to have a relationship with us, but are not interested in doing cooperative work with Israeli organizations. And there are yet other Palestinian organizations with whom we've had dialogue who simply are not prepared to accept any funding of any kind from an American source, even a private organization like ours. So there's quite a range of actors involved, all of whom have very strong interest in promoting environmental remediation and environmental improvement, but the political profile of those people is widely varied, and it's something that anybody who gets involved in any way with these things has to take into account and has to understand.
Would someone like to share some thoughts, intervene, address this question either of financing and support, or certainly around cooperation, Israeli-Palestinian cooperation for environmental remediation? Yeah, Clive.
I think a real opportunity that hasn't been fully leveraged is, and actually it relates to the morning session, is the role the private sector can bring into some of these projects. Like what Ken mentioned, we know where to go if we have to get the $100 million grant. We go to the World Bank, we go to the IMF, and the FAO, the United States government, that's where we're going to get the big money. But the intermediary issues, and we know maybe where we can get some of the smaller grants as well, some foundations and cooperative grants. But I think a major opportunity that is not being fully met is the role of the private sector. And here, for example, I've been struggling. There is so much water technology in Israel. There is so much capability there, but many of these companies have yet to develop a social environmental agenda, which of course is something now that is being taken sort of for granted by large-scale corporations, but it's not yet something that is really developed in Israel. And I've begun to have discussions with the private sector, whether it be water or others in Israel, say, look, this is where you should be thinking about, especially in helping to address some of the issues that we share with our neighbors, not hundreds of thousands of kilometers away, but 5 kilometers away. That's why I'm proud that we are beginning to develop a partnership with Nitafim, one of the few companies that actually is beginning to address or take seriously the social agenda. But I think beyond that, there is a lot of opportunity for organizations like myself, and I would say with Martha as well. Corporate financing, I think, is something that we should start to address and develop the appropriate strategy, especially in the scale-up of these sort of untested or pilot types of technology that we're trying to bring eventually to the market. I think corporate financing, support by large-scale corporations that have a lot of those abilities that we don't have, access to markets and so on and so forth. That's something that I've yet to see happening, and I think it's about time that the private sector step up and start to bring in some of their experience and money to addressing some of these issues.
Yeah, certainly on the matter of risk-taking and innovation, it would be nice to see some of those innovators take some of the social and political risks in building the type of relationships that you're talking about and that we're seeing today, so that we can look not only at the way in which and defer to those to the negotiators, but to recognize that there's power that runs right through society, and the ability to try and innovate is really within the grasp, I think, of every of every member of each of those societies. We also talk about different ways to cooperate and what we might learn from cooperation from other places or from these places here. And I wonder if somebody on the panel would like to talk further about cooperation. Jeff?
Yeah, I just wanted to make the point that for all the people in this room, you witnessed history. You witnessed something very interesting, that we live in very interesting times. And it sort of was a side note at the end of his talk, but when the Jordanian water minister at the very end mentioned that the Joint Water Committee met, in my research, I went all the way back to the 1960s, and the Israelis and Jordanians used to meet at a picnic table secretly before the '94 agreement. And they used to talk about how water would be divided in a way that would help the stakeholders, the farmers, the people who needed the water. And if Jordan needed a little extra, Israel would give a little extra, but then that water would be returned. And it was a zero sum, but it was a cooperative, and I argue that this was sort of built the path to the peace agreement. What was really amazing that we were able to hear about in this meeting where the Israelis came and talked is that the Jordanians were saying, don't just give us a little water now and we'll pay you back later, but give us water and we'll pay for it. And that's the revolution of desalinization. That there could be a pipeline, and this could also play a revolutionary impact with the Israelis and the Palestinians, but that there is scarcity, that the Jordan, because of the refugee issue with Syria, is moving from the 4th most water-stressed country in the world to the 3rd because of what's going on with Syria, that this is a serious U.S. foreign policy issue, and that because of the innovation that's been going on in Israel with desalinization, instead of give me a couple cubic meters here, I'll give you a couple cubic meters there, that water and can be rationalized through being monetized, you know how much money it's going to cost, that it really can play a revolutionary change in how this issue is going to be, how this issue is going to work. Now, if you don't have good governance, it's not going to work. But it's it was something that was very sort of hidden at the end, and I just wanted to highlight that because it really is something very important, and I think we were all lucky to sort of hear it and to hear about that meeting.
Alon wants to say something, and then
first of all, I just have to preface my remarks by saluting Heather's presentation, which was fantastic. Everybody was good, but especially good. I don't know if I'm going to share it. It reminds us.
All of Heather's partners.
Right, and the team.
I'm sure that she was a good representative of a great team.
Yeah,
but
some of the team members are here. Christy
okay, well,
is
I
still
see
here.
you too, and
Val is there.
it's great. And I think Eric gets a lot of credit because I understand that maybe that delegation might not have happened if there wasn't sort of what we say in Hebrew, mishugada devar, somebody's crazy about this issue getting you over there. So I think it doesn't always happen just by that. But I think Dan's point is, Jeff's point is very, very thoughtful. And I think if American University is thinking about, well, what would be a real constructive contribution we might make? And I think sending over students, and this is interesting, but you guys are inside the Beltway. And what's going to move a lot of this stuff in the future is American intervention, both in getting the parties to the table and holding their feet to the fire, and then helping to organize the funding that will lubricate, hopefully, some of the progress. And so when we talk about desalination being maybe a game changer, Israel and the region is setting certain new standards. And desalination really, really exacerbates the problem of global warming. So if we can start linking these sustainable energy projects to this kind of development I think it would be a wonderful contribution. I think America's leading role in climate change, unfortunately, has been lacking for many years now, at least since the beginning of the Bush administration. And this might be an interesting way to do that. So when you go and use the stature of this university and maybe talk to people at the State Department or get a hold of somebody from Kerry's office, don't forget that although desalination is the solution, it also is part of a problem, and maybe we can do it all right in one big package.
Thank you.
You want to be a visiting professor here?
Richard, we have an intervention at this end of the room.
By the way, we'll be closing here soon, but there's a reception to which everybody is invited.
In the museum, in the Cats and Art.
This morning I heard on the news that Netanyahu said that that Israel was gonna go to California and help them with their irrigation system. So I think maybe we could talk a little bit to California and ask them for help.
Okay, so I think Ken, you wanted to intervene?
So just back to the point about cooperation, I agree a lot of what's been said, but one of the things that strikes me about water cooperation in the region is that it really has not been subjected to the paradigm shift that the water world is currently going through. And so you go back and you pull out a 15-year-old report on the global water prospects from the UN or something like that, and it would say something like, we know what the problem is, we have the expertise, we increasingly have the data, what we lack is the political will to deliver on this optimized solution. You look at that same voice today and it will say, it's a greenhouse world, we don't really know what's happening with water, a lot of this is going to be subjected to uncertainty, it's a very financially uncertain time, it's a very climatologically uncertain time, and what we need are flexible and resilient solutions that will work robustly across a wide range of futures that we can't entirely control. That is not the paradigm that's governing either what we've seen thus far with Israeli-Palestinian, Jordanian water interactions, or frankly, the current set that's being queued up. And so this morning, when we heard from the business community, we heard a lot about flexible, decentralized, technologically innovative, efficiency maximizing kind of approaches to water, because that's where markets are going. And then this afternoon, when we turn to the political, not this group, and certainly not your projects, but sort of the larger political, well, we're going to dig a ditch between here and there, and we're going to let a lot of water go from here to there, so we'll put the water where we want. I have to say that's a very outmoded paradigm for managing water. And so my concern around cooperation would be an interim agreement from 1995, a JWC that doesn't meet for a couple of years. I used to tell my students, the best job in world politics, if you can get it, is to be on the world court. Because you only have to hand down one decision a year. And you're not in session half the time. I'm starting to think being on the JWC is better work than being on the world court. It's good work if you can get it, but it certainly doesn't keep pace with the needs. And so as we think about the institutional enabling environment for cooperation, it seems to me recognizing some of this paradigm shift that's going on, and a lot of which I think was really well illustrated by the group we had here this morning, so kudos to whoever put that group together, is going to be a critical element. Otherwise, we're going to get a framework of cooperation that might work politically in the near term, but is not going to be resilient for the water future that the entire region is going to be facing.
Sorry, Eric, can I say something?
Please, of course, yeah.
I just want to maybe differentiate the issue of the JWC. There's the JWC between Israelis and Palestinians as an outcome of Oslo in '95, but there's the JWC that Jeff was mentioning as an outcome of the Israeli-Jordanian treaty. The JWC between Israel and Jordan does operate very, very well, and there's a lot of very intense high-level and technical level cooperation, and the two sides are shuffling between each other all the time. So I just wanted to make that that distinction.
There's an intervention here. Richard, just in the middle of the room.
Listening to your last paradigm of the improbability of saying a definitive outcome on how to achieve water stability or infrastructure changes in the Mideast and with climate change, so there are no set answers, it seems like that certainly makes financing projects even more iffy, and how you go about getting to solutions when the answer is unknown, really. and you can only do your best effort forward, seems even more problematic. And then a last, more optimistic thought is that if you talk to millennials, there's a whole movement of looking at investment and pulling wealth away from Wall Street and investing in companies that will give a buck for your investment, but also create social justice and are the engine for social justice. So it seems like those are also places to begin to look at. Right now they do not have the big bucks, but maybe that is where some really powerful investment may come from.
Great, thank you. Is there an intervention on the side? or
Just say, as a former Wall Streeter, Wall Street just provides capital. That's its function.
Kind of as a follow-up to that also is, how does maybe placing an economic value on water, how can that either hinder or help promote some of these investments? Earlier today they were saying, venture capital firms really are very conservative and will shy away from, investing in water projects on a variety of scales. But, my thought is, well, if you're able to, create the business case for water efficiency or, water cooperation, maybe, there would be greater inclination to invest in those things. So I don't know if this is the appropriate panel to ask this question, but how does kind of an economic value on water, how does that maybe play into these dynamics?
Would anyone on the panel like to speak to that issue or to any of the other issues? Yeah, Ken?
So just to combine these two, so I think the point about financing is well taken. However, there are modes of analysis that allow you to identify more robust strategies and less robust strategies. So when the World Bank costs out Red Dead, they say, here's the value of the land, here's the value of the water, here's the value of the ecosystem benefits, here's the jobs created, et cetera. And they estimate one parameter, maybe a couple if they do a little sensitivity analysis for each of those, and they come up with a number. So for example, they estimate the environmental benefits of restoration of the Dead Sea at $30 billion, which is not a trivial amount. However, the truth is we don't know what the water is going to be worth in 20, 25 years. We don't know whether this is the price or this is the price or this is the price. So what we need is a more kind of robust form of analysis that says, let's look at 1,000 different scenarios and let's identify solutions that work in 700 of those 1,000 scenarios. And that, as a very gross generalization, that tends to lead toward decentralized, multiple kinds of approaches, more appropriate scale kinds of things, because it has a certain resilience and flexibility. If you're going to bet the farm on a dam, there had better be water flowing down that river 30 years from now, or you miscosted the value of the hydroelectricity pretty dramatically. And that's what I'm talking about in the paradigm shift. And so it's a more probabilistic kind of assessment, but it doesn't mean, because sometimes when you look at some of these scenarios, there are projects that are quite robust and will work across a wide range. And so the uncertainty almost becomes an endorsement of that kind of a project because of its flexibility.
In the 1950s and 60s, Israel perceived water as survival in life. And when you see water in that context, you're gonna fight for it. And the whole Arab diversion and how Israel responded to it, there wasn't sort of an economic value to water. It was, if we don't protect this, we're gonna die. As a state, as a people, we have to do everything possible to do that. Now Israel's a developed country. As Alon Tal mentioned, you can, using sort of a basis of 50, 60 cents because of desalinization, you can figure this is tens of millions of dollars, and what that's equivalent. You see, when you're seeing it on one side is survival, another side is one airplane. Your policies are very, very different, and that's important. And by having even more of a role with desalinization, where it makes it easier to sort of say this is the value, and there are a lot of complexities in sort of what is the real value of a cubic meter of water. It's easier for people to say, you know what, maybe it is worth it to spend more money on how we build apartment buildings so that we can save more water because that water is really worth X amount of money as opposed to water being free. The other thing that I just want to point out is this idea of, I teach international business. Of course, all the ideas of innovation and startup and efficiencies that the companies this morning talked about is critically important. But there's market failure, and there has to be an important role of the states in dealing with these market failures when it comes to dealing with scarcity and water. And I just want to sort of, quickly, there's two different approaches when it comes to development. There's the sort of the European approach, the European Union approach, and the NAFTA, the North American approach. When you become a member of the European Union, a lot of money comes to helping you build ports and roads and developing. When Mexico and Canada, but more so Mexico, became part of NAFTA, they didn't get any money from the United States to help build their roads, to make them a more effective partner. And I think that it's really important that when Israel's looking at the integration of Jordan and even more so of Palestine, that it sees the European approach as being much in its self-interest, but obviously more enlightened, but in its self-interest makes a lot more sense. And the best example is wastewater treatment. It just doesn't make any sense that Israel today is not investing, because it is in its interest to build in what is now Area C, which will be part of a future Palestine, investing in wastewater treatment plants. It should be done. It should have been done 5-10 years ago. But there's this idea that let's let the donors take care of this. Israel needs to be more proactive. It needs to take that European approach to development, and that goes back to the idea.
Can you just, Bibi's in town, do you mind just mentioning that to him? I said, Bibi's in town. Do you mind mentioning what you just said? Because I think he needs to hear this.
Now, people have come from far away. So, Munter, did you want to say anything to close, or Clive, or Alon? Any? I said any closing words? Especially from you, or Clive, or Munter, or Alon. Finished.
Give peace a chance.
Give peace a chance. Okay, we'll invoke John Lennon at any opportunity.
Okay. Let's say, I don't want to open another stream of discussion, but it comes to my mind hearing this discussion and change of approach and best water management practices in the whole region, is that you said, Ken, what would happen in 20 years, 15 years, we don't know exactly, but it's a way which we will be following. But what would happen if the geopolitical situation would be changing? And I mean, if relations between Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan, which would progress, and they would have better agreements on water resources, on better water use resources, water resources use, for example. We know that in Lebanon and in Syria there is enough water for Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Israel, and Palestine. What would happen if there would be a larger regional agreement? We look to the situation only focusing on countries miserable with water, Israel, Palestine, and especially Jordan. Yeah. But Israel and Palestine, also Jordan, are taking the water from Lebanon. They are coming through the Kinneret from Lebanon. Not to talk about Iraq. The water present in Syria would be enough for all of these countries. Something for which politicians should think more about. We could make all of our efforts, possible efforts as technicians, to solve water for Israel, Palestine, and Jordan. But there are major strategic and political decisions which should be taken and to think about more seriously.